بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبع سنته إلى يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the first lesson in the lessons, benefits that can be taken from the book Adaab al-Mufrad, a book that was a collection of hadith that Imam Bukhari put together. And inshallah, we'll go through the commentary. Now, this commentary will be provided in this Zoom as a link for you to download. It's available in the English language. For those who cannot buy it, they can download it and follow along. And even though some of the commentary will be taken, some of the commentary will be taken from the commentary that's written in the book. But also, as these are lessons that I have been attending with our Sheikh Aziz bin Farhan Al-Anazi, may Allah preserve him, and I've been attending his class personally and taking down some notes, so also where applicable, share some of his explanation and his lessons and benefits in regards to the topic, inshallah. Now, before we go into that, I want to read with you the brief biography of Imam al-Bukhari, because we all know Imam al-Bukhari as being the great scholar, the one who put together or collected the Sahih al-Bukhari. But not many of us know more information about him. So it's only correct, as in the book itself, Al-Adaab al-Mufrad, it starts with the introduction and brief biography of Imam al-Bukhari. So he was known as the Amir al-Huffaz, and even was known, he's even called the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers in Hadith. And they even called him Sayyid al-Fuqaha, the chief of the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence. And his name was Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Mughira ibn Bardizbah al-Ju'fi al-Bukhari. And the name of Bukhari is an inscription, or ascribing him ascription to his place of birth, Bukhara, which is in Uzbek, Bukhara, in current day Uzbekistan. So he was born on Friday the 13th of Shawwal, 194 after Hijrah, after the Jummah prayer. Now, his father was Abu al-Hasan Ismail ibn Ibrahim al-Ju'fi, and he was an eminent scholar of Hadith who learned from Imam Malik rahimullah. And he met other great scholars such as Abdullah bin Mubarak, Hamid bin Zayd, Ahmed bin Hafs related that shortly before his death, Imam al-Bukhari's father said, "I do not know of any single dirham in my wealth from an unlawful means, or a dirham from an ambiguity." However, Abu Hassan died while al-Bukhari was only a child. So the Imam grew up under he was brought up by his mother, who was also a righteous woman and an Advent worshipper. So his early studies, as a young boy, Imam Bukhari learned the Quran. He studied many books of Islamic sciences. And he heard and narrated a hadith from the scholars of his time. Since then, he was known to be intelligent, brilliant, and hardworking. Muhammad ibn Abi Hatim said, "I asked Abu Abdullah, as in Imam al-Bukhari, how did your affair start?" He replied, "I was inspired to memorize hadith when I was in school. So I inquired, how old were you then?" He answered, 10 years old or younger. Then I used to attend the classes of Ad-Dakhili and others. One day while he was teaching the people, he said, Sufyan narrated from Abi Zubair, who reported from Ibrahim. So I said to him that Abu Zubair did not report narrations from Ibrahim. He berated me, but I said, refer to the source. So he went in and checked it, and then came out and said to me, "What then is it, O young man?" I answered, "It is Zubair ibn Uday, who related from Ibrahim." He took a pen from me and corrected his book, and then he said, "You're correct." So we can see here, at such a young age, that Imam al-Bukhari was already correcting much older scholars in Hadith. So when Imam al-Bukhari was asked how old he was then, he said he was only 11 years old. He continued, "By the time I turned 16, I had memorized the books of Ibn al-Mubarak and al-Waqi' and known their rulings." Hashim ibn Ismail, who was together with Imam al-Bukhari as a student, said, "In our student days in Basra, he would memorize whatever he heard and he did not use to write due to the strength of his reliability of memory. So he wouldn't even write down the hadith. The other students would be writing down, Imam Bukhari would be memorizing. And Abu Bakr al-Furuzani said, I have not seen anyone like Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. When he holds a book of knowledge and looks at it, reading it once, he memorizes it, and completely from that one reading. Just for the brothers who have come now, what we started doing, we've started reading through, maybe you guys can either buy this book or download it. They've put it in the, it's on the Zoom one, but there is a very nice translation of Adaab al-mufrad, which you can get hold of. Here in Dubai, I bought it online at deansquare.com, if you're familiar with that one. So we're just reading it now because every Adaab al-mufrad, even the Arabic one, it starts with the biography of Imam Bukhari. So we're just going through that now. So his journeys for learning. Imam al-Bukhari traveled to the Arabian Peninsula in 210 after Hijrah, and at the age of 16, together with his old mother and his brother, to perform Hajj. He later stayed in Medina, where he commenced the compilation of his work on the biographies of narrators of Hadith, called Tarikh al-Kabir. And his journeys in search of knowledge also took him to places like Basra, Kufa, Sham, Homs, Asqalan, Egypt, and Baghdad. So we see how people were before. For us, we have, mashallah, for us it's a blessing because we have so many options. Like many people now, majority of students in this class are on Zoom, which is why I'm looking at Zoom. You have to forgive me. So we can see how easy it is for us these days, but how the scholars they used to, we hear narrations of companions who would travel from Mecca or Medina to Syria just to confirm one hadith. And unfortunately, many of us get lazy sometimes just to, when we have technology in front of us. So during the trip to Baghdad, the scholars of Baghdad intended to test his brilliance and intelligence. So they'd heard of him, that they'd heard in advance that he was coming. So they said, let's put a test. Will he stand up to this, what we've heard about him? So what they purposely did is, and many of you may have heard this story, is they mixed up the chains of transmission for 100 ahadith, given completely different isnad, which isnad means chain of transmission, for a completely different text. So they would take one text, and they would take another chain of narration, which is for another hadith, and add it to that hadith. And it would really require the one who knows the hadith, together with their chains of transmission, to be able to distinguish between them. The 100 ahadith with their mixed up chains of transmission were distributed amongst 10 scholars who would examine Imam Bukhari one after the other. And people were gathered to witness the event. And during the test, for each of the hadith read with the chain of narration, which was mixed up, Imam Bukhari said, I do not know. And people wondered at the answer because he had become known as the Amir al-Mu'mineen of Hadith. So when he replied, I don't know, they were very surprised at this. After all the examiners had finished questioning him concerning the narrations, he turned to the first and said, concerning your first hadith, it is such and such, citing the correct chain of transmission for the text. I want us to ponder on this. That they've taken a particular hadith, they've taken the chain of narrators and took it to a completely separate hadith. And not only did he know the hadith, he knew the chain of narration for that hadith was different to that hadith. This is something, quite amazing. So he did the same thing to the second examiner until he read all of the 100 hadith with their correct chains of transmission and text to the 10 examiners. Hence, the scholars attested to his knowledge of the hadith and regards to his precision in his narrations. Now, his teachers. Having traveled far and wide in his pursuit of knowledge, Imam al-Bukhari studied under the leading scholars in his time. Al-Bukhari recalled, when I visited Balkh, they requested me to dictate to them from the narrations of every person from whom I had written hadith. So I narrated 100 hadith to them from 1,000 persons who I had written down hadith. Therefore, due to their large number and eminence, those who wrote the biography of the Imam would either classify his teachers according to their city of residence or according to their ranking as reporters of hadith. And there are too many teachers to go through, but some of the well-known ones were Imam Mekki ibn Ibrahim, Abdan ibn Uthman, Yahya bin Yahya, Qutayba bin Sa'id, Ahmed ibn Hanbal, Imam Ahmed, Ishaq ibn Ruwayah, Ali bin al-Madani, and Yahya bin Ma'in. So these are just some of those names themselves are mountains of knowledge. And we can see that Imam al-Bukhari These were some of his teachers. Some of his students, again, there were so many students, but just some of them we can think of. Imam Muslim, who put together Sahih Muslim, was a student of Imam Bukhari. Imam Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dunya, Imam Abu Isa Muhammad bin Isa Tirmidhi, we all know Tirmidhi, Abu Qasim al-Baghawi, Abu Bakr al-Bazzar, Imam Abu Bakr ibn Ishaq ibn Khuzaymah. Again, we all heard of Ibn Khuzaymah. One of the an interesting thing that we're mentioning while we're here is many people, when we talk about Kitab al-Tawheed, they say this Kitab al-Tawheed, the first one to write such a book was only such and such years ago. Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abd, Sheikh Ibn Khuzaymah, back in these early times, had a book by exactly the same title. Imam Bukhari's death. He passed away on the night of Eid al-Fitr, the 1st of Shawwal, 265 after Hijrah, in the city of Khartank in Uzbekistan, which is now Uzbekistan. Some of his works, he has Tarikh al-Kabir, Tarikh al-Awsat, Tarikh al-Saghir, which is the biographies of the narrators of Hadith. Many other books. Of course, we know as well, his most famous book, the most authentic book after the Quran, is Sahih al-Bukhari. And in his book, he stipulated in Bukhari to compile only a hadith that fulfilled the stipulated conditions. So he had memorized, if I can remember correctly, I don't think it's written here, he'd memorized along the lines of, I think, around 60,000 hadith, but he only selected around 9,000 hadith, which fit his own particular criteria. 9,082 hadith that all those ones he'd memorized, those were the only ones he felt would meet this strict criteria that he'd put down there. Now, Al-Adab al-Mufrad, and as I mentioned to the people on Zoom, because as I mentioned, most people here on the Zoom, that we will be taking from a book, which if you don't have, you can purchase it, or it's actually, they put it on Zoom to download. If you type Adab al-Mufrad, there's two. There's this one, which I thought was the only one, but there's actually a better one, which you can get from, I know in Dubai it's available on deansquare.com. Deansquare.com, I came across it. Yeah, printed book, yeah, that would be the best thing. You can also download it, whichever is easiest for you. But if you want to order then, you're in Dubai, I found it on deansquare.com. Deansquare, D-E-E-N, square.com. And you just type in Al-Adab and it will come up. So what we're going to do in these sessions is we're going to go through that particular book. Their commentary is brief. So at the same time, we're going to mention from some notes I've taken from the classes I've been attending of Sheikh Aziz bin Farhan, who's currently doing lessons in Arabic on Adab al-Mufrad. So Adab al-Mufrad, it is a book that deals with the subject of moral etiquettes in Islam. It focused more on customs and traditions of the early Muslims. So in a time nowadays where we are suffering, a lot of us from, well, many of us, we have issues when it comes to Islamic characteristics, Islamic behavior. Some of us, it could be, but actually the book starts with the most important of when it comes to the people is parents. So it starts talking about parents and how to treat the parents, and it moves on to everything you can pretty much imagine that you'll deal with on a daily life, the interactions you'll have on a daily life. So it's a very important book, and that's why it was compiled as a separate work. It has 128 sections, 256 hadith, 644 sections, with well, in total it has 1,322 hadith, and they all relate to this to characteristics, and it has also benefits from the daily life of the Prophet ﷺ. And there are actually, what's a bit different to this book than Bukhari is in Sahih Bukhari, Imam Bukhari, he stipulated to collect only authentic hadith. But in this particular book, there are some hadith that may be weak. But a lot of them, even if they're weak in the chain of narration, they are correct in the meaning, the majority of them. So because they are to do with, you could say, what we call, I'm trying to think of the word in Arabic, they're to do with our good deeds. You know, like when it comes to using weak hadith, we cannot use weak hadith for particular, like if you had a weak hadith that had a particular act of worship that's not backed up by an authentic hadith, you wouldn't say the meaning is good, I'll take this weak hadith. Or if you had a weak hadith that was related to something in belief, you wouldn't take it. But if it's something that is general, there was a hadith, for example, recommending to pray, to give sadaqah, and there are many hadith authentic then you can say that it's allowed to do it what they call fada'il al-a'mal, for good deeds. So in all the hadith in here, even they may have like a particular narrator in the chain which doesn't quite connect, but they are backed up by other hadith. So that's why the scholars, even when they mention that the hadith is weak, they still narrate it, they still teach it. So there's a lot of introduction to the book. We'll just move on, inshallah. And you have to forgive me that I'm looking a lot here because most of them are online. So it actually starts, chapter 1. On the words of Allah the Exalted, we have enjoined man to be kind to his parents, in Surah Al-Ankabut. So it was reported by Abu Amr al-Shaybani, who said, the owner of this house, and he pointed to the house of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, said, I asked the Prophet which action Allah the Mighty and Exalted loves best. He said, prayer at its proper time. I asked after that, he said, then dutifulness to parents. And I asked after that, he said, then jihad in the way of Allah. He said, he told me about these things. If I had asked him to tell me more, then he would have told me more. So the commentary in the book, it mentions here that the hadith exhorts or emphasizes towards observing the prayers at their stipulated times and being dutiful to parents. It also shows the keenness of the companions of Allah's Messenger for good deeds. So they were always the first to ask. They were always asking, what can we do? What are good deeds? How can we reach Jannah, etc. And the importance of giving responses to questions based on the condition and need of the questioner. Otherwise, he ﷺ had mentioned faith in Allah and his messenger, jihad and the well-formed pilgrimage, in that order, in other narrations, as the dearest deeds to Allah the Most High. So depending on sometimes the situation, the order may have changed. So you may sometimes see that another thing may have been mentioned. Sometimes the Prophet ﷺ, he would choose the situation he's being asked and the situation of the questioner. So for example, there was a hadith where a man came and said to the Prophet ﷺ, give me some advice, and he told him 3 times, do not become angry. So that is a general advice, but the Prophet ﷺ knew for that particular person, that advice is what he needs to be successful, because he knew from that person that he has an issue with his anger. So, but it's something we could all take away and implement in our life. But at the same time, I just let you turn that off. So at the same time, these are general advices. So from here, what I also want to mention is because some notes I took down from the Shaykh in regards to this. So he mentions here that the Shaykh in the lesson we went to, he's basically mentioning that this shows us that in reality that the parents, after worshiping Allah, it actually says in the Quran, قَضَى رَبُّكَ أَنْ لَا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Indeed, or it was commanded or ordered upon you to, I'm just doing this from my head because the translation is not here, but to worship Allah alone and to be dutiful to your parents. So what does it show us? As we're going to come along and see many hadith and many commentary on this. It shows us that after worshipping Allah alone, the fact that Allah puts it in the same ayah, in the same verse, it shows us that this is extremely important. And on the other side, if it's extremely important that after worshipping Allah alone, to be good to your parents, then to be dutiful to your parents, then it's the same way. If you do the opposite of that, it's one of the most grave sins you can do. And as we go along, we're going to hear more and more. And there's another hadith that follows it, that Abdullah ibn Umar said, the pleasure of the Lord or of your Lord lies in the pleasure of the parent, and the anger of the Lord lies in the anger of the parent. So this is because Allah the Mighty and Exalted has ordered obedience and dutifulness to the parent. So they must be obeyed, except when they order disobedience to Allah the Most High. So there's a principle Islam that says لا طاعة للمأخلوق في معصية الخالق. There's no obedience to the creation in the disobedience of the Creator. So that's why the only thing that you can disobey your parents is as if they are uh, asking you to do something haram, asking you to make shirk. And as we know that even as many of us may be watching are new Muslims, even when it comes to our non-Muslim parents, we have to obey them and respect them. As the Quran says, unless they tell us to worship other than Allah. And I mean, just the fact that, I mean, I don't think we can emphasize more on this really. If you think about it, we just look at those words, the pleasure of Allah, the pleasure, the happiness. Allah being happy with us lies in the pleasure of our parents. And then the anger of our Lord lies in the anger of our parent. So, I mean, if that hadith was the only hadith mentioned when it comes to, and there's so many more, but if that was the only hadith mentioned, that should in reality be more than enough to have such a hadith that mentions that. As we go on, we go on to the second chapter. These chapters are really small, so in each chapter you may have 1, 2, 3 hadith, depending on the author. He added some hadith, some chapters are literally 1 hadith. So now we have dutifulness to one's mother. So on the authority of Bahaz ibn Hakim, from his father through his grandfather, Muawiyah, who said, I asked the Messenger of Allah, towards whom should I be dutiful? He said, your mother. I asked, then towards whom? He replied, your mother. Again I asked, then towards whom? He answered, your mother. And I said, then towards whom should I be dutiful? He said, your father. And then the next relative, and then the next nearest relative, and the next nearest relative. And if we look at the commentary on that hadith, so this shows, first of all, that the eagerness of the companions, as we saw in the previous hadith, the eagerness of the companions to want to know the ranks of good deeds and the priority of good deeds and good actions. It is also, preference here is given to the mother. Why? If we look at the mother, she is the one who bears the child. She's the one who gives birth to the child. She's the one who breastfeeds and looks after the child. And generally, she's the one who does the general care of the child. But there's an interesting fact which is not mentioned in the book, but from the lesson, is that the scholars have also said that when it comes to the general, I guess you could say, affection to some extent, or the taking more care, it's the mother. But when it comes to obedience, it's the father. So they say when it comes to the general, maybe being a bit more affectionate, a bit more caring towards the mother. But when it comes to obeying, it should be, and that's what the scholars have defined it. So it's not like the father says something, go and do something, and the child goes to his mother and says, Prophet ﷺ, and I'm sure this happens, Prophet ﷺ said 3 times the mother, so I'm going to listen to mum. The scholars say when it comes to the matters of authority in the house, the father takes the upper hand. But the general way that someone, it's kind of a common sense generally. Most people, they try to be a bit more of, maybe they give their mother a few more hugs than the father. It's just that affection. It's usually more affectionate towards the mother, that kind of thing, and have that kind of extra affection and respect because of the fact that she was the one who raised you, she was the one who bore you. And what comes to my mind right now was the other hadith of if I remember correctly, it was a man who came to, I don't think it was the Prophet ﷺ, I think it was Umar radiallahu anhu. A man had come from Yemen and he carried his mother on his back and done tawaf. Did the whole Umrah, if it was either Umrah or Hajj, whatever, even if it's just Umrah, to carry your mother on your back, it's hard enough to carry a toddler, a small child. So he carried his mother on his back and he'd done the whole of Umrah. So he went to Umar and he said, have I paid my mother back for all that she's done for me? He said, you haven't even paid her for one labor pain. One labor pain. So that's another amazing statement that really emphasizes and brings home. So if we go on to another hadith, Ata ibn Yasir reported from Abdullah ibn Abbas that a man came to Ibn Abbas and said, I asked a woman to marry me and she refused to marry me. Another man asked her and she agreed to marry him. I became jealous and I killed her. Is there any way for me to repent? He asked, is your mother alive? The man replied, no. Ibn Abbas said, repent to Allah the Mighty and Exalted and try to draw near to him as much as you can. Ata said, I went and asked Ibn Abbas, why did you ask him whether his mother was alive? And this is the main point here. He replied, I do not know of any action better from bringing a person near to Allah than dutifulness to his mother. The commentary mentions here that the people of knowledge should guide the rest of the people towards the things that benefit them, such as how to repent from sins, no matter their gravity. Also, being obedient and kind to the mother is mentioned in this hadith as an atonement for the sin of taking a soul unlawfully. Jealousy could lead to backbiting, slander, hatred, and worse sins such as killing. And I just want to check it because I believe there was a statement that mentioned I want to check if there's any extra comments. So the point here is, of course, we know Islamically that if somebody was to murder somebody, and they also put to death. So I'm not sure of the background of this hadith in regards to that, but it would be fair to say that most likely this could be someone who, before that ruling was implemented, or it could have been also the fact that somebody had come at a later stage when after this act, or it could have still been that that person still would have been most likely would have still been put to death, because we wouldn't assume that a Sahaba like that, someone would confess murdering a woman like that because of jealousy, and he would just say to him, but the emphasis here is, even if you're put to death, you still have to make tawbah, right? But the punishment is there. So the scholar, from what I recall from the lesson of the Sheikh, he mentioned that the implementation of the had, or the penal code, or the punishment would have taken place, but the emphasis on here was, how can that man between him and Allah, how can he make tawbah from that? And he was saying, make tawbah and be dutiful to your mother, because we know as a general principle, even though this is in general, this is connected to the minor sins, but we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, fear Allah wherever you are, and follow up a good deed with a bad deed, it will wipe out the bad deed. And also it says in the Quran, good deeds, they wipe out bad deeds. But the scholars have said in general, that's referring to minor sins. So if someone, A'udhu Billah, was to murder or fornicate or whatever it may be, it's not enough to say to them, I will just pray from now on and that will wipe it out. You must make a particular, like a specific repentance for that. But the kind of sins that we make on a daily basis, this is similar to the 5 daily prayers. Prophet ﷺ said, from one prayer to the other is a kafara, an expiation from the sins you do, and from one Friday to another Friday, and from one Ramadan to another Ramadan. And these are all in reference to minor sins. When we move on to chapter 3, on dutifulness to one's father. But now let's get the father's turn. So Abu Hurairah said, someone asked, Messenger of Allah, towards whom should I be dutiful? He said, your mother. And this is the same hadith really, but he was asked then towards whom? He said, your mother. He was asked then towards whom? He said, your mother. And he asked again to whom? He said, your father. So sometimes the hadith we find in the book, he repeats them because of the relevance. So rather than just have hadith, the chapter about the mother, and that hadith is there with another hadith, and then skip, he'll sometimes the Imam Bukhari, he put together another chapter with a hadith that he mentioned in another chapter because it's still relevant to the topic. So this is self-explanatory. Another man came, Abu Hurairah said, a man came to again, I won't repeat this, but this is the same hadith that they're mentioning with regards to this. Chapter 4, on dutifulness to parents, even if their treatment is unjust. So it was narrated by Ibn Abbas that any Muslim who has Muslim parents and is dutiful to both of them, seeking Allah's pleasure, Allah will open 2 gates of Jannah for him. If there is only one parent, then 1 gate will be opened. If he makes one of them angry, then Allah will not be pleased with him until that parent is pleased with him. And Ibn Abbas was asked, even if they treat him unjustly, he said, even if they treat him unjustly. And this is a big misconception that we see with many people. They say, I don't speak to my father. He was so harsh with me when I was a child. He was always, he was always aggressive. He was always this. But we can see here that they asked it, even if they treat him unjustly. And Ibn Abbas said, even if they treat him unjustly. So even if the parent treats the child unjustly in a wrong way, but the child has to literally, as they would say, swallow their pride and be the better person and keep the connection, depending on the severity, because this usually opens the door for questions. My father used to do this, my father used to do that, or obviously depending on the situation. If it's not safe for you to visit your father, then you just send a message or something. But there has to be that kind of connection with the father and the parents. I mean, now I think will probably be the time to go for questions, because it's been half an hour. The lessons are, the idea is the lessons will be about half an hour long. So we've already reached just over half an hour. We have many people on Zoom as well. So we will, inshallah, open the possibility for questions if there are any. Okay, I have one here. Okay, obeying parents. If the parents are Muslims and yet force children to involve in riba, not follow Sharia on inheritance and break blood relations, and if not obeyed, tries to break ties with children. In this case, how can we obey parents? We want to die as obedient children and raised in Akhirah as obedient to Allah. Okay, I mean, I don't know how the parents can force the child to do riba. Maybe it means they force them to take a loan. That I'm not sure. In that regard, you can't, if they're trying to force you to take a riba loan for them, you can't obviously obey them. When it comes to breaking your blood relations, and we see this a lot, we find out this father has an argument with this brother. So there's this uncle and these cousins don't keep in touch. And I've actually heard this asked many times by two of the major scholars, and they've even said, in that case, your father says, for example, don't contact your uncle, maternal uncle, paternal uncle. The scholars say, in this case, you disobey him. Because what do we say the principle in the beginning? For anybody, let alone the father and anybody else, that there is no obedience to the creation if you're disobeying the creator. So in this case, what will we be doing? We'll be disobeying the creator, because we know that as we're going to come, as we go further on in this book, in the next chapters after parents, it starts with keeping family ties. So in regards to that, the scholars, they said that you contact your uncle, but maybe you do it like, or your aunt, or whichever relative it may be, from the close relatives. And even later as well, we'll come onto the section that will tell us what are the relatives that we have to keep ties with. Is it everybody? Is it second, third, fourth cousins? We will come into that, inshallah, in the upcoming lessons. So here you must keep in contact with those relatives, like your uncles and your aunts, even if your parents say not to, but something simple like a message or something along those lines. Please can you mention some ways to be dutiful to your parents? That's a good question, and it also comes up in the will be broken down in the upcoming lessons. But the most important way to be dutiful to your parents is by obeying them, speaking to them politely. I mean, we're going to go, inshallah, in the future lessons coming up. You'll see some amazing, maybe even unbelievable, for lack of better words, for us in this current time, unfortunately, of ways that people will be dutiful to their parents. I mean, we hear stories of people from the Salaf, people from the pious predecessors who their mother would ask for a glass of milk late at night, and he went to get the glass of milk or water, whatever it may have been. He came back and fallen asleep. He didn't put it on the bed, or he didn't put it on the table and oh, I'm tired. He stayed awake the whole night. And when she woke at Fajr time, she's like, son, what are you doing here? And he basically said, I was worried that you would wake up and then I wouldn't be able to give you what you asked for. Things you can't even imagine. Like there's even, and this is one of the things that will come up in the other lessons, but there's even statements of the scholars that say you should not look for too long staring in the eyes of your father. There should be a bit like if you were to imagine now you to meet a king or something, you'd feel a bit shy from staring all the time in his face, because you say this is the king, you kind of look down a bit. Or this is the kind of thing ideally people should have with their parents. I think nowadays it's hard. I think many people can't even imagine doing that, because we've become so detached from that kind of thing. Now we have children and teenagers and whatever it may be, even adults complaining, and we know in the Quran that Allah says, do not even say oof. So what about all the adults or teenagers or wherever it may be, not just teenagers, even adults, when their parent calls them and they put the phone down on them and they're just insulting or complaining. big. If Allah says don't even say oof, it's the kind of the most minimum sign or expression of being like annoyed or upset about something. What about the ones who slam doors, or they go up to their bedroom and they start insulting their parents because they can't hear them, or sometimes what they even think. So it's something we have to really train ourselves. Just checking if there's any more questions. Anybody here has any questions? Yeah, they are. They're going to be recorded. They're going to be uploaded. They should be uploaded probably within a couple of days to the Islamic Information Center YouTube. You type Islamic Information Center YouTube. They'll be there, inshallah. Did you have a problem finding this class? Yeah, it's a bit of a it is a bit of a problem. Ideally, we would like to move it into the mosque, but initially when we took permission based upon the center, because this center, what you're looking at now, is connected to the Islamic Information Center, and this is where we have our new Muslim Academy. So all those, mashallah, hundreds of people who become Muslim in Dubai and stuff, many of them, they will come here on the weekends and have classes. So we kept it here, but we're thinking of possibly reapplying and moving it to the mosque, because there's even some women who say they want to attend. And there's a couple of questions here. Is joking with one's parents a form of disrespect if you're used to them? I don't know, how can you not be used to your parents? But I think maybe he means like, maybe you're on that kind of, I guess what they would call chilled relationship or something. Again, that's a difficult one, because every custom is a bit different on what's suitable. But I think if it gets to that kind of stage where you're joking with your parents like you joke with your friends, not a good idea, because you may find, and I may have done that, we may have done it, you may find that when you're joking like that, you may go a bit too far, and you may say something that you should have really said to your parents or your father or your mother, but you did that because you become so accustomed to joking with them, and they became like you have a good relationship, so that you kind of forgot at that moment in time that that's your parent and not your friend. You could have said something like that usually would be disrespectful, but because you said in a joke, it doesn't seem that. But then you just said, "Oh, I just said that to my dad," or "I called my dad bro," or "I called my dad homie," or something, or whatever it may be, which might not be the best thing to say in that regards. My daughter is very stubborn, and she's getting a bit indifferent now, because this is parents now as daughter. Again, I don't know what you mean by that. That's something that my daughter is very stubborn. Any solution to remove the stubbornness? Again, that really depends. It's a bit vague. What's the age of the daughter? How is she stubborn? What is she stubborn in? That's not something that can be answered simply like that. And inshallah, as we go along, we'll come into chapters as well that will deal with children. And as I mentioned, I'm also attending this book in Arabic with the very well-known Sheikh Aziz bin Farhan al-Anazi, who's our Sheikh. He's a very well-known scholar here in the UAE, a student of Sheikh Ibn Baz, Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, Sheikh Al-Fawzan. So as I go to his lessons, we're quite far now from here, but as I go to his lessons, there's more benefits that he, mashallah, elaborates, because the commentary on this book, as you'll see when you download it, is a 3 or 4 sentence commentary, which is very nice. It gives you the essentials you need to have an idea or commentary on what was mentioned. But the Sheikh himself sometimes breaks things down into different things. So he, like in this book, Allah, we may go to the section here about keeping family ties. And this book won't probably, I haven't got that far, probably won't break it down into who exactly are the categories. This is the kind of benefits we'll get from the notes I've taken from the Arabic version, from the Sheikh's lessons, inshallah. So it looks like that's it, I think, unless the person's now, had a person been really disobedient to his parents, didn't know that this disobedience to Allah. Now he knows, but one of his parents is not alive. What can he do in that case? Good question. First of all, Tawbah. That's the first thing you can do. And increase in dutifulness to parents. And again, we're getting all the answers from the coming chapters now. What is dutifulness to one's parents when they pass away? The most important, the most beautiful thing you can do to be a dutiful, obedient, righteous child to your parent who passed away is to make dua and ask Allah to forgive them and give charity on their behalf. And connect with their people who were close to them. So, for example, it was the father who died, and he had some really good friends. From obedience to the father after he died is to keep contacts and ties with his friends. Now, if you're a female, it doesn't mean calling up his friends. It means maybe asking your brother or someone to pass, or his wife to pass on my regards. You know, he was trying to pass on regards to such and such. He was a good friend of my father. And my father always, you know, was always looked up to you. So I want to pass on all these things are what can be done. So you need to increase, you have to ask Allah for, ask Allah for forgiveness and make lots of dua. And there's actually another statement from the scholars that whoever, and this will probably also come up inshallah in the upcoming lessons, they said whoever makes dua for their parents 5 times a day has given their parents their rights. That doesn't mean someone says, now I'm not going to message my father, I'm not going to visit him because I made dua 5 times. But it's emphasizing that, you know, the very least you can do is make dua for them 5 times a day. And that's quite, you're in the salah, you're in your sujood. And we know that the closest, as the hadith says, the closest place that the person is to his Lord is when he's in sujood. So this is the best time to make dua, when you're in prostration, in sujood. Every day in your prayer, you can ask Allah, whichever parent it was, to forgive them and have mercy on them. And this is a way you can make up, inshallah, for the mistakes you made. Especially if you didn't realize there's also the element of being ignorant. I'm sure it wasn't like, you know, there's obviously all of us know to some extent you can't be bad to your parents, but maybe you didn't realize the extent that you cannot be bad. So you have to make tawbah and take those steps, inshallah. I think that's it. Probably not, but what about making dua for non-Muslim parents? First of all, it says, can ladies attend this halaqah every Sunday in the masjid? Not at the moment, because we have no permission to do it in the actual masjid. It's not a problem, but we just didn't apply for it initially. So we're looking to apply for that, inshallah, depending on the attendance. What about making dua for non-Muslim parents? When it comes to non-Muslim parents, of course you can make dua for them. In fact, you can make, some of the scholars say that you can make, you know, sometimes you see, we have a thing where we say, someone sneezes, and you say, Yarhamakullah, for example. Some of the scholars that say you can reply to some of the non-Muslims and say things like, Allah yabarak feek, barakallah feek, to a non-Muslim. What are you're making a dua that Allah gives him barakah, Allah gives him hidayah. You're not doing it. So for us, we're not making the same dua when I say barakallah feek to the brother who said to me, you know, did something for me, or said jazakallah khair, and I say barakallah feek. But here you're asking for the barakah of hidayah. And this is reported from what I remember from even scholars like Imam Ahmed. He had the opinion that you can say this to the non-Muslims, but your intention is you're making dua for this barakah for the guidance. And of course, for non-Muslim parents, you should be making dua every single day for them to become Muslim, for 100%. That's not even like a matter of debate Islamically, for sure. As well as trying to invite them to Islam the best you can. If you can't, if they don't accept the message, you can just your behavior, because it does have an effect. I've seen it myself, being from a family that have, you know, I hope none of my family's watching, but who have like non-Muslim brothers and sisters, etc. And I know it has an effect. Just me trying to be a religious Muslim and not trying to answer back to my parents, and even as adults, there's always those little elements of argumentation that can happen, even for the best of non-Muslim, you know, respectable families. But if you're trying to practice Islam properly, you take it to another level that to them is quite shocking. You know, like, he never speaks to me like this, or even if we have a disagreement, he stops. He doesn't, like, you know, raise his voice like someone else might. So your behavior itself will have a big impact on them. And definitely dua. That's the most important thing you can do for them. What's the required age for prayer? It's kind of going off topic, but what's the required age for prayer to be compulsory for a child? That is, they have to start learning when they're 7. And the hadith mentions to hit them. Now, this doesn't mean you get out the belt or the sandal or the chappal, as some people call it, and start beating them with it, right? Doesn't mean that. And in fact, the scholars have clearly said that there should be no, it's not the kind of hit where it hurts in reality, it cuts the skin, it bruises, it leaves a mark. So anyone who's doing that, first of all, they're going against the hadith and what the scholars have clearly explained. They call it الضرب غير مبرح, like the beat that has no like physical mark left. So it's more like a what's the word, a symbolic in that sense. It's not designed to be hard and rough. It's designed to show the child they're doing something wrong. They know that this is wrong and there's some kind of consequences behind it. Just like some people say, I'm going to send you in the corner for half an hour. The child stands there, his legs that he connects that. That's the idea behind it. And it's just like those other things you hear when people say, it says in the Quran, or it says that, for the woman, if she's disobedient, to beat her. Oh my God, Quran is telling me, Islam is telling me to beat. The scholars have said that beating is known to be like you're taking a miswak and you're hitting the bottom of her foot. There's no pain. If we all go home, and I think you'd have to have a pretty big, ginormous miswak to hit the lady's foot to hurt her. So the idea there is, again, to show that they are upset. It's not, but the compulsory for them is when they reach puberty. That's when it's compulsory. That's when they're going to be judged themselves. And that's why it's so important. And even recently, Sheikh Aziz bin Farhan was asked this question, and he said, or he mentioned, should I say, that when you're between 7 and 10, or the child, this is the time where you have to teach them. You are responsible. If you do your job correctly, and then later on in life, that he becomes a teenager, whatever it is, he starts to slack. You Islamically are not held responsible for that. But if it's the other way around, and then we see this, some person says, oh, my son's 12, 13, he won't go to the mosque, he won't pray. Oh, but you found that until he was like 13, he let him play. He didn't tell him to do, he didn't follow the guidelines of the Prophet ﷺ. So the child did not, like anything when they're young. If you want the child to become a good football player, generally speaking, you're not going to start playing football at 14 and become a professional football player. You need to start him young. This is the idea of the prayer. That's why you're supposed to start when it's 7, and then the matter of 10, to make sure it's part of their daily life. So that's, but when do they actually compulsory is when they reach puberty. What about if you make dua in English and adhkar in English because you don't understand it well in Arabic? You can make dua in English. There's no issue in making dua, but the adhkar are acts of worship. So you should do them your best in Arabic. And if you want to read them in English for your own understanding, because you said they're understanding, right? So of course you should read the dua so you know what you're reading. But you should always try to do it in the best you can in Arabic, especially unless you're a new Muslim who just became a Muslim. And we know even for a new Muslim who just became a Muslim and he doesn't know Al-Fatiha, he can just pray by repeating continuously, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, until he learns Al-Fatiha. And they just repeat that through the whole prayer, Allahu Akbar, and they just repeat the same adhkar until they learn. But if a person is generally a Muslim but just finds it hard in Arabic, you have to do the dua just like you do your prayer in Arabic, but of course, the adhkar, but then read it in English so you understand it. As for dua, you can make dua in any language. If it's a dua you're making yourself, you see what I mean? It's not like the dua of qunut, so you wouldn't necessarily go up and start making it in English, even though some scholars say you can, but the point is you should focus on Arabic, but reading the adhkar in English, and dua can be done in any language. Okay, we'll just read these last 3. If you're far away from your parents, is calling them on a daily basis a form of being dutiful, and will it suffice? Yes, inshallah. That's what the scholars have been asked these kind of questions continuously, and they mentioned that if you're in a different country, then it is enough to call your parents. To be honest, if you're doing it daily, that's a very good job, to be quite honest. I can understand messaging daily, but to call daily, don't stop it. Don't take it. I'm not saying, but that is very good. That you're calling them on a daily basis. Of course, there is that issue: is are you away from your parents for a necessity? Because it even came up while I was attending these lessons. One of the questions were, I'm in a different country. My parents don't like me to be abroad. Should I go back to them? And the Sheikh, to be honest, said, unless you're somewhere out of real necessity, Like, you can't survive back where you're from, and you can only survive, for example, being so far away from them. But he said, otherwise go back to them. And he even went to the level of saying that, like some people, when they become Muslim, straight away they say they want to make hijrah, they want to migrate out of the non-Muslim countries, and they leave their parents behind. The Sheikh will say, this is wrong. You should be with your parents, serving them, being kind to them, providing for them, looking after them, and calling them to Islam. Not saying, I become a Muslim now, off you go. And I did that when I was young. I didn't know any better. I came out here when I was very young. Didn't have that kind of advice. So I'm not judging anyone, but this is the reality. So this shows you the importance of the parents, and keeping in contact with the parents and being dutiful. Again, this is another one. Richard Williams, my parents are non-Muslim. I answered that definitely you need to. Do I need to? Definitely you need to, 100%. You need to make dua for them, because who can guide them except for Allah, right? We are only, even Allah said to the Prophet ﷺ about his relation to his uncle, Abu Talib. He said, indeed, you do not guide man ahbabt, who you love. Indeed, Allah guides those he wants to the straight path. So you have 100%, you have to make dua for your parents. You make dua for yourself. Imagine if we as Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ used to say every day, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbat qalbi ala dinak. Oh, the one who turns the hearts, or who's in control of the hearts, keep my heart firm on the religion. And this is the Prophet ﷺ. We know that he could never have been misguided, but he would still ask these kind of du'as. So if we as Muslims need to ask Allah to keep us guided, 100% you need to be making dua for your parents, as well as slowly, with wisdom, in a nice way, or give them da'wah. I think that's it, inshallah. Maybe not. Yes. No Sheikh, actually. Call me Ustad, maximum. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Second is funny, like question. Some people might just they say like they have a career. That's right. But which you know can best way ever made the second or ever Allah say that you have a career.
Yeah, that's maybe that's a question for someone much higher than me. But I mean, as a general principle, if the person says they were a Muslim and they believed in it, there's a big difference, right? I mean, again, as you know, there are opinions that if the person never showed any sign of Islam, never practiced Islam whatsoever, never fasted Ramadan, never prayed Jummah, never did anything at all, there is that, that are they really on Islam? But it's not really my place to make a specific person, you see what I mean? Whether maybe that needs to be put to a scholar, what do you do in that situation? Explain to them the exact situation of the parent and what it was. What do I do in that case? Can I ask them for Allah's mercy? That's not a question I'm comfortable in. Abu Talib was different, because Abu Talib was a yeah. Well, he knew it was the truth, but he never accepted it at all, right? Like, he never defined himself as a Muslim. So again, it depends on the individual case. But you take that to someone who's more qualified than me to give you such a, inshallah. So I think that's pretty much it. There was one here. Again, if someone's asking about maternal cousins and male and paternal male cousins, again, this comes up actually, but I'm assuming it's a female, because she's asking them, do we have to keep ties? And again, this came up not just in the lesson with Sheikh Aziz, but with other sheikhs, but just as came up with Sheikh Aziz just recently, and the answer to that was, he was asked the same question in the last lesson last Friday, and he said, how do you keep, he said, for example, you come into a family gathering, You might be walking past with your brothers, your father. You just say Assalamu alaikum and continue. Or you say to the female cousins, give salam to my cousin Ahmed, my cousin Abdullah, pass on my salams. But you don't like make that big effort of sitting down and chilling and we're cousins, and which happens a lot, unfortunately, because you can marry each other, right? So from that perspective, and that reminds me of hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, one time he mentioned that the brother-in-law, he's called the brother-in-law al-maut. He said al-hami huwa al-maut, like the brother-in-law is death. What do you mean by that? Because this is where the barriers come down, right? It's my brother-in-law, he's like a brother to me. One thing leads to the other, and you hear sad stories of the brother-in-law having an affair with his sister-in-law because these barriers came down. And that can be the same with the cousins, because at the end of the day, they're not your brother and sister. So that's how you give salam to them. If you, like I said, in passing comment, where there's a group of you and you walk into their house, Assalamu alaikum, how are you? And then you, for example, the women go to the women, the men go to the men, or you ask if they have sisters to pass on salam to my, to your brothers Ahmed, Abdullah, whatever it may be. Khair, inshallah. So we'll end it here, and whatever I've said which is correct is from the tawfiq of Allah. Whatever I said which mistake is from myself and from shaitan. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.